Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Helen Schaubmeyer, CALED Program Manager, and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. Today's webinar is CEDA Financing and CALED's new PD&F division. Our presenters today are Michelle Stevens, Program Director with CALED, Aaron Laurel, City Manager and Port CEO with the City of West Sacramento, and Julio Morales, Senior Vice President with Kosmont Companies. A quick reminder to our attendees, directing you to the control panel. You may use the question box to type in your questions to the presenters at any time. By tomorrow, I'll be sending via email a link to view the recording of the webinar. And because I send this email to all attendees, it sometimes ends up in spam. So if you don't see the email in your inbox by 5 on Thursday, check your spam. Still not there, contact me at helen@caled.org and I'll send it to you separately. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our technology sponsor, California Academy for Economic Development. And now we'll turn this over to Michelle, Aaron, and Julio.
Thank you, Helen. So I'm going to start us off today talking about the California Enterprise Development Authority, which is CEDA. For longtime CALED members, this is probably not news to you because you've been hearing about CEDA since it was formed in 2006, but we have some fun updates about CEDA. So I'm going to be talking about industrial development bonds, and then later Julio will be talking about BAND, which is a brand new program that we rolled out at our 2023 conference. So I will start out with the industrial bond or industrial development bond conversation. And then of course, for those of you that know or don't know, CEDA is a joint powers authority that does conduit bond financing, and we have a few different products that we offer. So we have 501c3 bonds for 501c3 organizations that are making larger capital improvements. So really thinking about 2 million and up for those projects. And then we have the industrial development bonds, which I'll talk about. We do commercial PACE financing, and then we have BAND. This is a great organization that's been able to help CALED, and to become a member of CEDA, you just have to have your council or board of supervisors pass a resolution. So it's very easy to take advantage of this financing for your businesses. But getting into the details of the IDBs, this is a third-party agreement between CEDA, the borrower, and the lender. So CEDA does not have the money. We're not providing the money to the businesses, but we do help give it that tax-exempt status, which usually allows the borrower to have a better interest rate. So for IDBs in particular, this is a great program that it's focused on manufacturing. And since October is Manufacturing Month, we thought it'd be a great time to talk about it. So to be eligible for an IDB, you must first be a manufacturing business. So obviously the folks on this call, you guys are economic developers, but in your community, you have manufacturing businesses probably. So if that business has a project, maybe they're buying new equipment, or they're expanding their facility, or maybe they're building a brand new facility, this could be a perfect opportunity for an industrial development bond. So the process entails CEDA going to the treasurer's office to get allocation. Usually it is a competitive process, so it is important to have like the best possible application. So if you're retaining jobs, if you're adding jobs, if you're an important part of your local economy, that all helps sweeten the overall view and helps get that allocation. As far as the requirements beyond being a manufacturing business, it really has to hit the sweet spot on sizing, finance sizing. So about 2.5 million is the floor, and 10 million in financing is the ceiling. So that is not a crazy high ceiling. And currently there is legislation at the federal level to increase that maximum, because in California, project costs can quickly exceed $10 million. So with that in mind, this is really more focused on small and medium-sized manufacturers. And then one more caveat to the sizing of the project, the finance sizing. the overall project cost can be no more than 20 million. So that makes this a very specific tool for very specific projects. But if you do think you have an industrial development bond possibility, just reach out to me and we can go through it and figure out if it fits or not. And then one thing I wanted to mention is a recent example of an IDB that CEDA just did in California. And when I say recent example in California, it's actually the only example of an IDB in California this year. But it's a really great example because it shows how manufacturing businesses really play an important role in their community. So this project in particular was for JBR Rogers Company, which is located in Lincoln, which is in Placer County. It's a rural area. They were expanding their manufacturing facility, and they're the largest employer in this city with over 200 employees. So they play a very important role in the local economy in Lincoln and the larger county, and they provide really good jobs to their employees. So these are the types of projects that we want to focus on with the Industrial Development Bond Program. And so if you have manufacturers that are playing an important role in your community, definitely reach out, because this potentially is a way to get them lower cost financing so they can continue to stay in your community and grow. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Julio, who is going to talk to you about BAND. So Julio.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Just a side note, the very first transaction I worked on was an industrial development bond for Jelly Belly. So I started my career doing that. Was definitely the tastiest one I ever worked on. Certainly enjoyed the big, large container of Jelly Bellies they gave us when the deal was done. I am talking about the BAND program, and the BAND is an acronym for Bonds Assisting New Development. And essentially, we're looking at two types of transactions. These are land secured deals known as community facilities districts, or CFDs, and assessment districts, and also enhanced infrastructure financing districts, CREAs, which are Community Revitalization and Investment Authority Acts, and climate resiliency districts. Essentially, there are two types of bonds. Land secured is a tax that you impose on the underlying property to help pay for infrastructure. And I'm going to use this phrase. The other list of alphabet soups, the EIFDs, CREAs, and CRDs, are really similar or akin to RDA 2.0. So really based on the tax increment in that area, and it's really something that happened in the advent of the dissolution of redevelopment. So we are actively working on the CFDs and ADs and actively forming a number of EIFDs and working on some CREAs and CRDs. So those are new tools. The CFDs and ADs have been around for quite a long time. Some people actually know CFDs as Mello-Roos bonds. Next slide, please. So the key to this program is it's a conduit. The cities or agencies can actually issue these bonds, that being land secured bonds, on behalf of in most cases, a private developer, and the EIFDs on behalf of itself. But what the CEDA BAND does is essentially serves as a turnkey solution for these local agencies. We have a financing team in place. It allows you to facilitate things in a much sooner process, especially for the land secured CFD and AD bonds. The team's in place and go forward. We can help you in the formation of the CFDs and ADs, and also can help direct you to firms that can assist with district formation for the CREAs, EIFDs, and CRAs. The key to a lot of this is that these are financing mechanisms to both put infrastructure in the ground and help accelerate development. The sooner you can get those infrastructure in place, the sooner development can take place for whatever project, that being mixed use, basic residential. We help assist with all of those. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about CFDs because it's probably the most common financing tool, one that's been in place since 1982. They're really a public-private financing tool. They help finance public infrastructure, otherwise known as Mello-Roos bonds. You'll see that. In essence, what is done is when you go to a city or a local agency or a school district and want to build new construction, they ask you to pay for the cost of new development, place in a new school, sewers, roads, and the like. And one of the things that the Mello-Roos law allows you to do is to finance those on a tax-exempt basis and essentially impose a special tax or lien on the property owner. So you might see on top of that 1% base tax, you might see an additional tax that helps pay for the infrastructure, community facilities that you build. All these new communities that you see, many of them in Sacramento, Southern California, use CFDs to pay for all those community facilities and new infrastructure. So there's a number of things that can be financed. It's often used in many of the growing communities throughout California, and it's been a tool around since 1982. There is one other component, is that you can also have a services component, which pays for additional services in that project area. So if you're adding a new police substation, additional police and ambulance services, those services to enhance the service in the new project area or new development can also be paid for by that special tax. Once again, that special tax is imposed on the property, and once the developers sell it, it then becomes part of the property tax that the homeowners pay on an annual basis. Next slide. So there is a number of type of improvements, but generally you'll see these: streets and sidewalks, schools, libraries, water and sewer, police and fire, parking, child care center, hazardous waste remediation, parks and recreation facilities. This is the standard infrastructure, and really the tool, CFDs were designed to pay for new development. So all of these things that you as a developer would be required to build, or you as a city want the developer to build, can be financed in the form of tax-exempt bonds and then paid over time through the life of the issue. So there's also an equity component to it. They don't pay the fee up front; it lowers the borrowing costs on the home, but also is paid over the life of the issue or the asset. The one caveat to it is the public improvements must have a useful life of 5 years. Now note, they can be located outside of the CFD boundaries. So you can contribute to a project outside. It has to serve that area, but it doesn't have to be within the boundaries specifically. Next slide. So I'm going to go over the basic CFD formation process. Typically, it is something that is initiated by the developer. Often they're known as dirt bonds, and the reason they're known as dirt bonds is because they're placed on a project development when there's nothing more than grading at place. The developer comes to a local agency, typically a city, school district, water agency, and says, we'd like to form a CFD and tax ourselves to help pay for the infrastructure that you're requiring us to build. Then it goes through a typical, there's a pre-formation process where you determine the list of facilities, the boundary map. The developer actually pays for the professionals. So there's a number of professionals, the guys and girls in suits, the financial advisor, bond counsel, underwriter, special tax consultant, and appraiser. They put down a deposit and pay for all of those costs, so there's no cost to the city. And then once it moves forward and you determine the scope of the project, really there's 3 steps. You do a resolution of intention, where you determine that you're going to form that district, identify the assets and facilities you're going to do, have a rate method of apportionment, which is really the formula that sets what the special tax will be, and you designate the boundaries of the facility. The next step is to go to the resolution of formation, and then you have a public hearing and election. In many cases, if you have less than 12 registered voters, and if this is done, which happens in most cases, in undeveloped land, they waive the election, and it's done as a landowner election, and they count votes based on the number of acres that each landowner has in the development. Once that is approved, you can actually waive the waiving period and essentially go to the approval and sale of bonds. So the process typically takes about 90 days or so, if in fact it's on undeveloped property. A CFD can be used for numerous things. For a completely built out area, it can also be done in that manner as well. However, it does have a 2/3 voter approval requirement. So often it's done on undeveloped land, and it's done with a single property owner who has all of the votes. Next slide. So we're going to talk real quickly about the advantages of a CFD to the private sector. We think it reduces equity, improves their capital stack. It's non-recourse financing. It really can finance 100% of the project costs that are eligible. So not all costs are eligible as long as it's public infrastructure. They come at tax-exempt rates. So for example, a 4% rate versus a 6 or 7% rate. It's non-recourse financing. So they only foreclose on the individual properties. And if one individual homeowner doesn't pay, they have foreclosure proceedings on that individual home. There can also be capitalized interest during construction, and there's no acceleration provisions. This is clearly something that gets the infrastructure in the ground sooner or later and serves as an additional source of equity for the developers who are working on your projects. And they can be a regular 200 to 400 unit residential development or a complex mixed-use multi-phase development. It's quite a flexible tool, but has a lot of advantages also, if we can go to the next slide, to the private sector. I think it's one last thing that's important to note is these bonds are typically, because they're sold on a new development, they're usually sold as non-rated bonds. And once, in fact, the project is built out, so they're called dirt bonds because they're sold just when there's dirt, and they're trying to put finance infrastructure in place. Once the unit is built and all 400 units are in place, the individual homeowners have the ability to refinance the project at much lower cost because now there's significantly greater value. Next slide. So the advantages to public agencies. I think one of the best components of a CFD or assessment of land-based debt is that new growth effectively pays for itself. They're designed to ensure that new development pays for itself. They pay for the infrastructure without burdening residents in the community. Note that there's a district form for those 400 units and only the property owners in that area pay that special tax. So those existing owners within your city or jurisdiction aren't paying for the new growth and new development. It's effectively off-balance sheet financing. You as a city or municipality are helping or assisting developers in securing tax-exempt financing, but it is not your debt. You're not responsible for making any of the payments. And essentially, you're serving as a conduit. We believe that the great benefit also is that it accelerates construction because you're able to finance these assets upfront, and it's much sooner than development impact fees. So often those development impact fees are paid as construction takes place. In this case, you can actually do it before there are sticks in the ground. So we think that it really is a great tool to help facilitate development. Next slide. So for the homeowner, I think some people say that CFDs, they don't like mellow roofs on a project, but in essence, a developer is going to either charge $450,000 on a home or $500,000 on that home. What the CFD does, it allows you to pay it over time of the life of the issue. You're not paying that entire fee. It lowers the home prices. Oftentimes, because of this facility, you're able to get additional amenities or enhanced construction improvement, and it certainly helps accelerate the entire process. So you can get things in the ground and help facilitate. And there's a significant component also to this, which is services. You can actually pay for the services or enhanced services in a district. So not just the infrastructure that goes in place, the roads, schools, swimming pools, all those community resources, but also there's a services component that can pay for police, fire, ambulance, street maintenance and the like for that project area or that individual project. Next slide. We believe the key advantage to CEDA band program is it's a turnkey solution. And the primary advantage to a city is, as an economic development specialist, you're going to say, oh, great, we talked to the developer and they would like to do a CFD or an AD or an EIFD. And what we do is we help you on the formation process, have a team in place, and it really serves as a turnkey. So once they just simply have, the city simply has to pass one resolution, and the finance department is not required to participate in the formation and sale or any post-sale compliance. However, the role of the community development department and public works remains the same. So in essence, what you're doing is you're going to another turnkey solution for the financing, but the city's role remains the same in public works and community development. Next slide. So what we bring to the table is an experienced financing team. Once again, it's a turnkey solution. These are in addition to the staff at CEDA, Best and Krieger serves as bond counsel and disclosure counsel. Raymond James serves as the underwriter. Kosmont Financial is the municipal advisor. And then you have to have, as I mentioned before, a special tax consultant who helps draft the rate method of apportionment. That would be well done. An appraiser for the project as well, which is BTI. That team is already in place. You don't have to go through an RFP process. That helps also accelerate the entire bond issuance process. Next slide. So we think there's different benefits. For the local agencies, we think it reduces administrative cost. There are multiple financing options. So we're talking about CFDs and ADs because those are well-established programs, but also we have the flexibility of doing EIFDs, CREAs, and CRDs, the new alphabet soup of tax increment financing. It's available to multiple agencies, not just cities, but also counties, utilities, and school districts, and they can combine them all at once. I think that's a primary advantage for the developers because instead of doing a CFD for the school district, a CFD for the city, and one for the flood control district, it can be wrapped into one. And we think that's a significant value because you're able to achieve economies of scale. Next slide, please. So these program benefits also provide you all this flexibility. We talked about the different types of bond structures you can use. We think it saves costs, which overall ends up being beneficial to the homeowners, and it's a streamlined process. It really is a turnkey process. We have board meetings every week, so that helps facilitate the approval process, and we already have all the documentation and team in place. So it really is a turnkey solution. Next slide. These are the other features, these what we call tax increment financings, enhanced infrastructure financing districts, infrastructure revitalization districts, climate resiliency districts, and community revitalization authority districts, or CREAs. This is what we call the alphabet soup of additional tax increment financing. These are different from the CFDs and ADs, which you impose a special tax. They essentially look to leverage the property tax that is built or developed once you build these new projects. In essence, I call it RDA 2.0. So once you might do, in most cases, you're going to do a CFD, you build the infrastructure, but at the same time, you form one of these districts to capture the new growth in property tax. Often you seek to get the county to participate and provide a portion of their property tax and help you leverage and finance additional infrastructure. Each of these have a unique component of what they provide, but there's certainly the new tool. And we think that they're going to be combined together with the CFD up front and one of these EIFDs or tax increment financing districts on the back end. Next slide. This is just a chart that will be available for you to look at the different types of projects and terms that each of them have. They all have little subtle differences, but they're fantastic tools for you to help finance infrastructure and projects in the future. Next slide. So the last part, and we talk about this, is we think this is a new twist on an old recipe. In the old days, people would be doing CFDs followed up by tabs to capture the tax increment. The CFDs were used to fund infrastructure costs, and the RDA captured the tax increment once, in fact, the project was built. The story really there is you had to wait to build enough tax increment in that project area to issue those tabs. We don't see that as anything new. I call this like RDA 2.0, that you will build the project and eventually capture the new value created by all that new development, not just in that area, but there might be other buildings, and then you can use that to help facilitate additional development, both in that project area and other areas. I think they're a bit more flexible, but essentially this is an old twist on the same old recipe, a new twist on the same old recipe. Next slide. I'm going to hand it over now to Aaron, I believe, on talking about project development and finance.
Yeah, thanks, Julio, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Aaron Laurel. I'm the city manager with the city of West Sacramento. Want to thank Julio and all the partners, including Kosmont companies and the others that he went over in forming that band program. I can assure you that Kosmont companies, Julio, no longer accept payment in the form of jelly beans, but they've been great partners with us in forming this new program. And it really goes hand in hand with what we're doing with the new project development and finance division, which I'm going to focus on. So just sort of backing up, I wanted to tell a little bit of the story about how we got here. It really starts with those of us that were around back then when we had redevelopment. Redevelopment, as many of you know or have heard at least, was the most powerful tool that was available to cities to drive transformation. Things like infrastructure, real estate, redevelopment, affordable housing, you name it, a lot of great things happened in California because of redevelopment. There were reasons that it went away, which we don't need to get into today, but the point is the work never went away. Us as local communities, whether you're a city or a county or an EDC, we all have projects that, but for the public sector being involved, are just not going to happen. Or we're putting together the ingredients to allow the private market to respond. So that's really what transactional economic development is all about, whether we're assembling property, whether we're investing in infrastructure and doing things like tax increment financing to fund some of that. We're cleaning up brownfields. We're doing all sorts of things that no one else will do for some of these sites that are so critical to our communities. So that's kind of the background for why the need to come up with a new solution, not just to some of the tools that redevelopment had, but also a platform to be able to advance them on a statewide basis, really was the foundation for why CALED took such an interest in this topic. I've been on the board at CALED longer than I can remember at this point. I know it was after dissolution happened, I think around 2015. And I really credit Gerbax, the CEO of CALED, and the staff. Michelle and Helen have been here, I think, for almost the whole time, most of that time. And really the staff has been driving it with our members to respond directly to the needs of our jurisdictions in this post-redevelopment environment. So like I said, I was a former redevelopment practitioner. I've been in West Sacramento for 19 years almost now. We were a really good example of a place where redevelopment worked. And so when redevelopment dissolution happened, myself, along with many other people in the state of California, we're kind of looking for a home and looking for a place to advance what the California Redevelopment Association used to do a little bit of, or a lot of, I'm sorry, including things like training, things like advocacy. And so CALED, at least initially, became the home for many of us that were sort of redevelopment castaways. And we took it from there. We did a lot of legislative advocacy. We built some of the tools that Julio talked about, primarily the tax increment tools like EIFDs, CREAs, and the rest of the alphabet soup. And so for many of those early years, we were working towards legislation to improve and proliferate the use of those tools throughout California. Also doing some trainings and some tracks at the conference that hopefully most of you have attended to help get the word out, but also get people familiar with and understanding of how they can use these tools in their own communities. So let's go to the next slide here. So out of that process, first it was mainly built on legislation, all the work that we did to establish and improve a lot of the new, post-redevelopment tools. CALED started having conversations around how do we not just stay engaged in this, but really put ourselves in a leadership position to help our members, and especially help those members that have these sorts of challenges, whether it's infill development or even new development, where we're trying to add companies and jobs to our communities, but need things like infrastructure and property, real estate options to help that along. And so it evolved kind of to the point where rather than just having it be something that CALED did, there was enough of an interest statewide to think about doing sort of an offshoot of CALED, and that's where the idea for the Project Development and Finance Division came about. So the division is now an official thing. It's been formed as a new division of CALED. We have a logo and everything. Had our first meeting, I think last week, and it has a really simple mission. It's really about protecting and growing the economic development and real estate tools that support the economy and also train professionals to execute those projects. So our goal is that we'll help people like yourselves both strengthen your voice and influence on these topics, but also enable you to use them in your own communities and train your staff and others in order to really drive the momentum that we are so crucial at creating and maintaining in our local communities to make results happen in some of these most challenging environments, especially when it comes to infill development. So the division right now is made up of, it's actually not very large yet, where we're actually looking for new members. The primary things that we're doing are both education and training. Legislative advocacy is a huge part of it. The ideas and the responses to legislation that the PD&F division will look at will be kind of in coordination with CALED's Action Advisory Council, which is a way cooler name for what used to be the Legislative Action Committee, I believe. So that's a big part of it. It's legislation review and introducing ideas that can go through the legislative process to ultimately improve some of the tools that we've built to this day. Like I said, technical assistance is a big part of it, whether it's through conferences or webinars like this, or some of our published resources like the tax increment primer that we did. We're out now on our second edition of that. And speaking of education, right there on the last bullet point, we're going to have a finance summit similar to ones that we've had in the past. This time it's going to be on January 24th up here in Sacramento. It's going to be paired, for those of you, some of you may attend our legislative roundtable and the rural exchange. I just learned that those are kind of going to be packaged as a series of events around January 24th. So keep an eye out for that. Let's go to the next slide. And in terms of getting involved in the PD&F division, I hope that all 31 of you that are on this webinar are either already involved or interested in getting involved, and we really need your support. So the commitment is not very big. There's a series of 4 meetings that we're going to be doing each year. The description is right there, but generally it tracks with the legislative calendar. A lot of the work that we get engaged with is a direct result of bills being introduced or CALED introducing bills that are on these topics. And so one of the meetings will be at the beginning of that calendar, so we can kind of brainstorm and kind of look at what's ahead. The second one would be once the bill introduction deadline happens at the, usually that's at the beginning of the year. And then as the legislative process goes forward, the summer is a really critical point, so we do another check-in then. And then around this time where the legislative session is ending, there would be a 4th meeting. So it's not all about legislation, but those are the points in time where the meetings are anticipated to occur. If we have other needs to come up with a meeting to address the topic more urgently, the committee is going to be nimble enough to allow that to happen at other points in the year. Next slide, please. So to be a part of the PD&F division, just to give you a flavor of who's involved right now, the roster is very representative of cities throughout the state. The chair of the committee is actually, she's the Economic Development Director for the City of Ontario. Some of you may know her, Jennifer McLean Hiramoto. She's actually on vacation right now, otherwise she'd be doing this. He got me instead. But what we're generally looking for is people who are involved in this area of work. Most of us on this webinar, I'm sure, are economic developers. We think of ourselves that way. But in terms of the transactional side of economic development, like I said earlier, people that are working on real estate deals in their community, people that are working on how to finance infrastructure, how to put a deal together, how to clean up a site that is a brownfield, all of the things that used to track with what redevelopment agencies used to do. And it's not just limited to that. Don't think of yourself, if you didn't work in redevelopment, many of you weren't around when redevelopment was a thing. We completely understand that, but it's that type of work. It's the work that is really transaction driven. If you're involved at all in that, or you know someone in your organization that is, we really encourage them to get involved in this. And so some of it is technical based. Most importantly, though, is just your ability to contribute. It's not a huge time commitment, but we want active voices. We want people that can, be thoughtful about reviewing some of these bills that come out, come up with good ideas that we can advance, and be available in a pinch sometimes if we need someone, say, to testify at the Capitol across the river here. So the other goal we have is that second to last point, is to strike some geographic balance in the state. And I can tell you, I'm just talking to some of the CALED staff, that right now we are very heavy on Southern California. Nothing wrong with that, because that's where most of the population is in the state. But we do need more Northern California members to this committee, to this division, and also rural members. Don't want to overlook rural economic development. Every small town in California has similar issues to larger cities in taking sites that are challenged and getting them redeveloped and getting things to happen that only the public sector can do. So don't, even if you're from a small city, don't dismiss this as an option. We want to hear from you as well. The link to the application is the last bullet point there, and I think Michelle is going to come back on and give a little bit more information about how to apply, and I believe that is our last slide. So Michelle.
Thanks, Aaron. Just really quickly to piggyback on what you said regarding the legislation, a lot of folks think because the calendar is kind of situated around the legislative calendar, that it's like, oh, well, I don't care about legislation. That's not really what I do. Therefore, I'm not going to be a part of the PD&F division. Legislation is just one component. So when Aaron was going over the what the division will do, so sending advocacy ideas over to the Action Advisory Council, that's just one part. But the technical assistance, the education and training, that's a huge component as well. So those 3 items really are equal thirds as you're looking at the division of work. So if you're not necessarily a ledge person, I don't know what they go by, ledge head or something, that doesn't mean you should move away from the PD&F division. You should still look at it. And
Michelle, if I could chime in on that too, it's exactly that point. It's beyond legislation. A lot of it is kind of thinking back to the CRA days. It's idea sharing. It's things where, you know, we're bringing together people of like minds to help each other and help other communities in solving some of these issues that we deal with on a daily basis. And so as these tools evolve and they become more used, EIFDs, for example, there were no EIFDs back when, you know, we started talking about this. Now all of a sudden there's dozens in the state. So we see that this is a forum for people who are either looking at a tool like that or already using it to come up with good ideas, whether they become legislation or not, just best practices, for example. This is your forum. This is your place to call home. So we really encourage you to get involved. Like Michelle said, not just to help us with legislation, but help us just with the overall proliferation of these tools.
yeah. And one of the other things with the training, the division members will really guide what the needs are. And because CALED, we have ideas of what we think the needs are, but we need the voice of the practitioners at the ground level saying, this is what I need training on, or this is what really would matter in my day-to-day work. So right now we're on the application slide, so that makes, that's perfect. If you are interested, definitely go to the website. If you just go to caled.org and go to the project development and finance, I believe it's the first tab under economic development resources or something like that. You can read more about the division and you can send in your application. So you know the applications are reviewed and approved by the board. So just applying isn't enough, you'll have to be approved. But then once that process is done, we'll be able to loop you into the larger conversation. And then I had a quick question for Julio. So hopefully you're still around, Julio. I was wondering, darn it, I'm gonna, like, the minute I said I have a question for Julio, it just left my mind. Oh no, I remember what it was. So on the band program, is there like a key time when a community should reach out to the band team, whether that's reaching out to me to talk about CEDA or reaching out to you directly as our band rep? Like, when is the best time in the development process? Oh, I think you're on mute.
That's a great question, Michelle. I think you're probably going to reach out 2 times. They're probably going to ask to get some basic background information, which we're always happy to provide to them, so they understand how CFDs work if they haven't done so themselves. And then usually, as you get closer to that development timeline, then I think it really makes sense to look at your different options. Clearly, what the CEDA band program does is it provides a turnkey to a finance department. So if they don't have the staff resources or expertise on land secured debt or some of these new tools, certainly the CEDA band team can assist. So really, an initial call always makes sense, but as you get closer and you've fleshed out all of the development components, you're ready to finance a project, we think at that point is the ideal time to really look at the financing vehicles, or a little bit ahead of that. So I guess the answer is twice. Initially to understand, and then as you get close and you've really fleshed out all the other components and you've negotiated everything you need to with community development and public works, then it's time to come talk to us and help get you the money, because it takes about 90 days to go through a formation process and issue a bond, possibly more. So it doesn't take that long. Maybe you might look T versus 90 to 120 days before when you're ready to start building a project.
And I'll just say too, one of the reasons that CALED and CEDA and you know, our members that were involved in the formation of this felt it was so important for the band program to come about is that, you know, we're really on the ground floor here when it comes to these tax increment programs. Yes, it's primarily focused initially on another offering for CFDs, but CFDs that are really any CFD, but I think the idea is that as some of our community members proceed with tax increment districts and get to a point where we're actually ready to bond, which my city, for example, is going to be there fairly soon. We're looking to pair things like CFDs with EIFD bonds, and band would be your go-to place to do it. So we're trying to get ahead of a market that's going to be coming up and really give people a favorable offering to both do CFDs but also tax increment bonds down the road.
Thank you for that addition, Aaron. I have a question for you, Aaron, as well, regarding the PD&F. So we're talking about folks at the municipal level, so they're either working for the city or county, and they're doing these types of projects day in, day out. So CALED's traditional audience is economic developers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that economic developers are the ones doing these types of projects that we're looking at in the project development and finance division. If we're reaching out to our members and saying, hey, if not you, then maybe look at these other colleagues, who or what positions, what titles would you say are some good examples that maybe the economic developer at the city should look to reach out to?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you know, no two cities in California are really the same when it comes to how they're staffed and the overall function of economic development. Let's start there. I mean, economic development is such a huge world, especially if you think of yourself as an economic developer. You may have the title, but like you said, someone else is going to be involved when it comes to something like, okay, we're ready to issue, you know, CFD bonds or form a tax increment district. It's not just going to be that one or group of people in the economic development department. It's going to be your finance department. It's going to be potentially people in your city manager's office. It could be people in your community development department. So what I would say is anyone who is involved in bond issuance, whether it's a CFD or anyone who's involved in looking at the initial setup of one of these tax increment districts. For example, in our city, you know, when we did our EIFD, the finance department was heavily involved, and we had our public finance manager who was at that time an active member of CALED for that reason. So definitely people in your finance department that, whether it's the director or other staff that are working on the public financing component of it, and then anyone who is involved in sort of on the redevelopment side of things, assembling property. A lot of cities have real estate positions, real estate managers, or other people, and maybe in the community development department that are tasked with, you know, assembling property for projects and things like that. The other one that often gets overlooked that I think is really critical are people in that work on the capital improvement program in your city. People in your public works departments, for example. A lot of what they do is they're looking at budgets and trying to figure out how to piece budgets together to fund infrastructure projects. And often, you know, the two don't talk to each other, where, hey, we're working on this financing tool that's a really long-term looking thing. You should really understand it. So I always encourage people that work on capital improvement programs, regardless of what department they're in, usually it's public works, to be someone who should be at least familiar with this. And I think the PD&F division is a great place to do that.
Great, thank you. And I mean, of course, from our perspective, we think everyone should be interested and no one should be turning down an invitation to be a part of this division. But Aaron, if you could, I might be asking you for magic right now, but do you have any compelling argument that maybe our members should use to get folks interested in, so say like an economic developer reaches out to their colleague in public works and they're like, I don't care. Is there some argument that they should use to be more persuasive
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I mean, I think whether you're a land use planner, you're an economic developer by title, you're a CIP manager, you're a city manager, your community has goals. Your community has land use goals, and maybe whether it's a downtown that's struggling or a site on the edge of your town that you want to redevelop into a manufacturing use, you name it. If it has a challenge, this is what it's about. It's not just about the traditional idea of economic development where, if we just do these things, we'll attract this company or that company. These are projects that only happen because of the collective work of city government. And if you believe that, I think a lot of us are driven by that idea. To me, that's the best argument. You go to your people in your community development department that have the specific plan for their downtown, but are trying to figure out, okay, how do we actually bring this to fruition? How do we work with developers and get people excited about it? Well, that's what these tools are all about. So I think the more people that understand them, the more support they're going to have within our organizations, and ultimately with people like me in my position. And so I think it's really critical to have those conversations in your own cities and counties, and then bring them to the level of where let's not just talk about it. Let's actually become familiar with it. Because when we had redevelopment, I can speak to this. We had a large redevelopment agency. It wasn't just the redevelopment agency staff that did the work and made everything happen. We had to rely on our planners and our engineers to bring these projects together and really bring about that transformative change. So I would say, try that angle. Just make it that this is something that is good for a lot of goals that the city is trying to accomplish, and it's all, we're all part of it. So this is just bringing tools to our overall effort.
Great, thank you. It's a very inspiring argument. I have a question also from the participants. This might also be a magic question. Is there a resource guide or handout that lists all of the available resources that we can refer to for a very large mixed use project that will bring housing, jobs, and retail within proximity to a BART station?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. And the answer is yes. And I'll let Julio give the more detailed response if he wants. I'll just say CALED. I would start with CALED's tax increment primer. So that sounds like a project to me that's a potential public-private partnership. It probably needs infrastructure, probably needs public participation, some financing sources. So the primer that CALED put together is meant to be an overview of the different tools and programs that are out there. And at least start there if you're not already familiar with some of those options, including EIFDs. And then I'll hand it over to Julio once you kind of have that basic foundation. It sounds like it's a call to maybe the band partners to get it done.
Thanks for that, Aaron. I would agree. That's the first place to start. There isn't one thing. It really depends on the individual components of the transaction, but most of it needs some kind of financing or some kind of additional sources. So grant monies are a little bit more difficult to kind of wrangle in one place, but financing are those tools that CEDA band has available to it. And then once you've read that, which is a fantastic primer, then either call Michelle or myself and we can walk you through the process. Really, the individual components of each transaction are so unique, and you kind of have to ask some questions and be prepared. And timing always changes. But the one thing that's consistent throughout is that these projects are really facilitated, as you said, through these tools, through EIFDs, through CFDs and assessment districts, and the other component parts to it, because there's always other grant money, other funding sources. So there isn't a cookie cutter answer to most of it, but for the fact that most of them are viable to do with CFDs or EIFDs to help in that process. So a call to us would be great. Understand that each deal is unique and has its own challenges, but the tools are usually flexible enough or can be converted to use for a different purpose. Some people call CFDs, for example, dirt bonds because they're often done on projects when they're brand new, but they can be used for revitalization of an existing project that's owned by someone. So a lot of them have more than one use to them or can be more flexible than you expect. But thank you for that handout. And
I see that Laura just put a link to the TIF primer, the second edition of the TIF primer, which just came out this year, in the chat. So you can download it there.
Okay, it looks like we also have another question. I've looked at the primer, but need to also look at what state and federal grants are available. Do either of you have any thoughts or feedback on some tried and true grants that work, or maybe grants are too much trouble for what you get? Just your thoughts and opinions on that?
No, grants are critical. When you look at places like, especially when I'll kind of touch on infill development. So our riverfront here, in order to get it to the point where we could actually build something, it was a combination of redevelopment tax increment, which now is, EIFD money. It was a CFD, actually 2 CFDs that we formed with our property owners. And then third, and most importantly, it was state and federal grant funding. So I would encourage anyone who is working, and when I say infill, I don't mean urban, rural. I mean, repurposing property, a lot of what these tools are focused on. And the state has actually quite useful programs at the moment available for those purposes. So one is the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program, the IIG program. I understand now there's actually a rural component to that program. And it's all about putting in infrastructure in exchange for commitments to build housing, and not just affordable housing, but market rate housing as well. And you can fund infrastructure costs with that grant program. That was our main funding source in the Bridge District up here on our river. The other one that comes to mind is the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program. I think a lot of times we whether it's for reasons that the local support might not be there, or whatever the case may be, there's this tendency to shy away from embracing affordable housing as part of an infill strategy. But a lot of the programs that are out there, including that one, that AHSC program, it's a ticket to a lot of money for infrastructure with a commitment to build some affordable housing in a development. So I would encourage people to look at that one as well. There's some other programs that are more recent at the state level. You might get the acronym wrong, but I think it's ECRG. It's I don't remember what it stands for, but it's a brownfield-based program. You can Google it. I think it's ECRG, and it funds brownfield cleanups to support infill development for all sorts of mixed-use development. So the list is longer than that. I would say if you haven't already, HCD is the home to most of these programs. So I know sometimes they get a bad name, but HCD has a lot of money and they do good work in terms of getting money out to help communities do the type of stuff that we're doing. So I would encourage you to start there and then look at some of the other programs in the state as well. So Julio, anything else to add?
No, that was pretty exhaustive list of resources. I think it's fantastic. The only thing is, you notice they change all the time, and availability always depends on your project. But it really is looking through that resource. Oftentimes we help finance on the back end, so it's a fill, right? Hey, I found 2 million, and they're going to finance with a CFD and the FD the other 8 of that $10 million project. I do think that's one thing people should note, is that usually with tax and bond financing, that equity contribution comes from the sources you're talking about, and you backfill with the EIFDs and CFDs. Or you may have a developer deposit or some other contribution. So everything is unique. Always take a look at it, but I think it's best. I wish there was one single clearinghouse. I don't think there really is. There's just because there's so many variety of things.
Yeah, there isn't, but there are resources out there that are, and it's not CALED necessarily, but there are resources out there that'll give you overviews of some of these grant programs. And just to fact check myself, it is ECRG, it's the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant Program, and it's through the state of California, specifically for brownfield redevelopment. So that's another good one.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on the brownfield redevelopment grants at the federal level. EPA has good grants available for that as well, and they work in rural communities as well. I know sometimes the money doesn't always translate, like it's perfect for cities, but not so good for rural communities. But in Siskiyou County, they've effectively used brownfield grants to help really kick off some development and economic development work in their area. And I don't think you get much more rural than Siskiyou County. So it's a good example. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any pop up. Julio and Aaron, do you guys have any final notes or messages you want to get across?
I think I'll just say that just understand that this program is largely still in its infancy, and CALED for the last almost 10 years has been building the groundwork for this, and I'm really excited about it because I think not only is the need there, the potential is there for this to really take off. And let's face it, I mean, in California, we don't have enough tools to do the work that we need to do. We've had more things taken away in the last 10 years than have been given to us. And so that's really what this effort is about. It's not perfect right now, but we need your voices. We need your participation and support to help build the toolbox and make things better. So I think what CALED has done by creating this new division and the band program is given us a really solid foundation to build on. And I'm really confident that we're gonna make a lot of progress in this next 10 years. And hopefully we'll forget about the days when we had more tools, when we had redevelopment at some point. So I just really encourage everyone's participation. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Julio, any final parting messages?
I tend to think that we're not everything new is old again, but it's very similar. I really do think that the EFDs and CREAs and other tools that the state has developed in the subsequent to the dissolution and redevelopment are very similar. They're not quite as effective, obviously, but what you're going to have to do is get your county or other agencies to help participate. I think that's what makes it more difficult. So you have to work a little bit more for those new RDA tax increment financing. But the tool or the process we used to do in the old days is you'd put in the infrastructure with the CFD, you'd build up the value, and then you do the tax increment, the tab bonds in the future. That's just going to be the same thing. You do the CFDs to put in the infrastructure, you wait for the EFD or some other type of CREA to build additional infrastructure and bootstrap. I think the idea is still there. Unfortunately, you're going to have to negotiate. It's not there by legislation, but clearly the counties and other agencies, they're going to benefit from it as well. So it isn't exactly RDA 2.0. You have to be more creative, and the money isn't as readily available. But I think we have a roadmap that we used before, and hopefully it will be fairly helpful.
Great, thank you. And I think an important note to end on, if you have questions, if you're interested in learning more about any of the items that we talked about, just reach out. You can email me at michelle@caled.org, and I can connect you to either the PD&F division, or I can connect you to CEDA and the band program. So just reach out. Ooh, and Laura just put my info in the chat, so my email is there if you need it. And also, if you're interested in the PD&F, you can apply to become a member, or you can register for that January 24th event. The registration's not up yet, but it will be probably in the next month and a half. And that will be a great opportunity to spend one day and find out a lot of information and what's going on with that division and what's going on at the city and county level with project development.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank all of you, Michelle, Aaron, and Julio, for presenting today. Really great information about these new programs, new and old programs. CALED's next webinar Wednesday will be on November 1st from 1 to 2 p.m., where we'll discuss equitable economic development. And registration for this webinar will be open soon on caled.org. Hope you can join us, and wish you all a great rest of your day. Thanks again, all of you.
Bye, everyone.